Greetings to all viewers. This is King Echu, the Pan-Africanist from Southern Cameroon. Africans, we all saw what happened in the 77th session of the United Nations gathering. At the end, nothing was really accomplished. Leaders of the world express themselves based on their own experience and what is happening in their country and what needs to be done. But at the end, nothing really was accomplished because the United Nations is not united. It's ruled by power that came after World War II. For more 70 years now, the Western power has been ruling the United Nations. And African leaders and the continent of Africa has been begging for power, but power is not given, it is taken. It is taken strategically in order to accomplish what needs to be accomplished based on the interests of the African leaders. You see, one thing that the African leaders was crying was how undemocratic the United Nations is, and which it is, because the United Nations is run by the powerful. It's run by those who won the war after World War II. Though nations like Russia have their own interests, just like the United Nations, just like the United States has its interests, just like France has its interests, just like Britain have their interests, and those are nations that have the power of veto, including Britain. See, these five nations that have the power of veto, in a way, have control, have power over other nations that don't have the power of veto. And this is one of the cries of so many African leaders during this session, during the 77th session of the United Nations. The cry of how the United Nations is undemocratic. If it is undemocratic, that means the United Nations is a dictatorship, meaning those who power dictate to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world will have to take it or try to do something about it. So how will Africa gain power? How would Africa have access to power to change the condition of Africa? Simple. There are many steps. Through the United Nations, many nations control and have influence or access to the continent of Africa. Through the Commonwealth, Britain and the allies of Britain have access in Africa. Through La Francophonie, France and France's allies have access through Africa. You see, the Western power have so much access into Africa, and African leaders and the citizens think that it's okay to be part of the Commonwealth. It's okay to be part of La Francophonie. It's okay for the European Union to use their influence through nations like France and Britain that have complete access into Africa to manipulate and control power in Africa. But you know, the African youths and the African leaders need to wise up. There are many structures that are being used against the interests of Africa and the people of Africa. And if the people and the leaders of Africa do not see reality for what it is, that institution like the Commonwealth is not needed in Africa, it's not wanted in Africa, it's not significant in Africa. Institution like Francophonie is not important in Africa. And we also have to understand that we have to create power to influence the United Nations. You know, you notice in this 77th session, the United States and other Western powers were talking about how they have to make, some of the African countries a permanent member. That's just talk to woo Africa so as to do their bidding. They are not going to give African leaders and the continent of Africa access to power that they use against the interests of the people of Africa. Which is why, like many African leaders are saying, the problems of Africa must be solved by the solution of Africa. We need to get out of the Commonwealth. We need to get out of La Francophonie. And we need to speak up against the European Union, because the European Union is acting like a colonizer, is acting like the slave master, which they are. But the European Union has no interest to speak for the African Union or for African nations, because they are part of the European Union and not part of the African Union. There are many things that we need to do as Africans. We need to get rid of all the military bases of French nation in Africa. And it's only the youths that must stand up like they are doing in other countries in Africa to send out the military of all military bases of France out of Africa. Not only that, that also means that with English Africa or British Africa, if you want to call it that way, where they have their military bases in the continent of Africa, the youths of Africa and the people of Africa need to stand up and kick out all the military bases of the British Empire in the continent of Africa. There's so much work that we, the African youths and the future of Africa, needs to shake things up. You see, everything that the white man does, it may seem like it's the interest of the world. It may seem like it's the interest of Africa. No, it's only the interest of the white man. That's one thing they are really good at, manipulating things. When you think about this war in Ukraine and Russia, they say this war is against is democracy versus autocracy. Democracy versus autocracy. Meaning that autocracy is evil and democracy is good. Good versus evil. Democracy is good, autocracy is evil. But that's all plain and lie. You may think democracy is good and autocracy is bad, but no. Democracy in this sense is being used as a way of saying that it's good. Meanwhile, it is being dictatorship to the world. Why is the world so concerned about the war in Ukraine, but they're not so concerned about the war in Palestine or wars in Africa? Wars in Africa and Palestine have been happening for so long, but it's not as important as the war in Ukraine, because this has to do with power. Power that is being used in the United Nations to control the world. Power that they need to use to control, to subdue Russia, because Russia is speaking against Western power. Western power may seem like, oh, they're the good guys. But you remember, these are the guys who went around the world colonizing nations after nations after nation, killing so many lives, but they want to cover that up and say, oh, democracy is good, autocracy in Russia is bad, is evil. and we must stand against the war in Ukraine. But they don't stand against the wars in Africa. They help foster the wars in Africa so that they could obtain their interests out of Africa. If you listen to many of the African leaders speak, they say the West are the one creating wars in Africa for their own interests. The Western nation could go in the Middle East and fight wars. They could go in Asia and fight wars. They could go in many parts of the world in Africa and fight wars. But when Russia decided to fight a war against Ukraine, oh no, you can't do that. But look at the history of the Western world. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years, 100 years, a bunch of lists of wars fought against other nations. So the war fought in Ukraine, there's nothing wrong in it. But the West has flipped it and said, oh, it is democracy against dictatorship. But what about all the wars they fought in the past 100 years against other nations? That wasn't dictatorship, or that wasn't democracy against other nations. They were using democracy to fight against other nations. Oh, it's ridiculous. War is fought for interests. It's not about democracy or autocracy or no. What is the interest? Why is Russia fighting this war? Why is Ukraine fighting this war, involved in this war? Because somebody else has interest in that war. And somebody helped mold it and push that war to happen. And the war will continue so long as both parties keep fighting and don't come to an understanding of how to stop the war and make peace. But somebody else has interest in that war. And the war continues. Why? Because Western power wants complete control over the world. Why would I say that? Without any opposition in the United Nations, the Western power will have all absolute power to do as they see fit or as they please. The only nation in the world that is standing against Western power, it's not even China, it's Russia. And you've noticed the Western powers have decided as a group to punish Russia through sanctions. That way they could get what they want. And when they get what they want, there will be no nation being able to stand and speak against Western power, because Western power will solidify their power if they win in this war, which is why Russia must win this war, whether they like it or not. That's how I see it. This is King H. Till next time.